the first thing you hear is a crunch, 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 as your mind starts to refocus, as we all space out in those long walks from one encampment to another, snow underneath our boots. Something slightly different snaps us back to reality, and we scan the desolate forest area, usually a thriving environment of life, but right now, almost a drab, dreary wonderland of snow and dead trees. Crunch, 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 snap! There's a twig to your right, and it's Megan Cannell.
Hello. Hi, guys. Welcome to Psychology at the Table. This is part of my continuing interview series at GameholeCon, and I am joined by none other than legendary Dungeon Master, Ruty Rutenberg.
What is legendary? What does that mean?
You do all the things.
Oh, okay.
So I can't remember all the things that you do. So tell the audience all the amazing things that you do.
I am I'm one half of Maze Arcana. I was a co-founder of Maze Arcana. I don't want to say I'm one half because we have now our cast and crew is expanding.
Huge.
Right, we're getting bigger and bigger, and we've been going for about 2.5 years. Mm-hmm. So I am the co-creator, co-founder with Satine Phoenix. We also do Celebrity Chair D&D, or D20, and I am the co-writer of The Wayfinder's Guide to Eberron with Keith Baker, which is the update for 5th edition. Mm-hmm. I am also the voice of Durnan for Waterdeep. And I am a voice actor, a screenwriter, and I've got a good number of acting credits under my belt as well.
Yeah, and you and I also have something else in common.
Uh-huh.
Which,
we've both been to deserts.
Yes, we have.
And everybody out there who's watching this probably knows what we mean in that sense. But I was a combat medic with the infantry for 4 years. Then I got moved to a commo unit where I became the new infantry training officer.
Okay.
Yeah, so to quickly say what that was is just like when you come from an infantry unit and you go into a unit who has no leg presence whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then even though I was the medic, it actually just doubled up. I became almost a full-time teacher because I was teaching first aid courses, first responder, and then I was teaching infantry movement. I was teaching room clearing. I was teaching like all of the things that I had learned from being with the infantry.
Yeah.
In that other situation. And then the silly thing was that when we'd go on bivouacs, they'd make me carry the saw. And I'm like, you realize like that is the worst strategic element you could possibly do, because then I am the person who has to stop and take care of people. And if the saw stops, it means that people get to move forward on our position.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's military for you, folks.
So, and the saws weigh about, I'm going to say anywhere between 5 to 10 pounds more, depending on the size of the drums and everything like that, than your standard M16 loadout.
Yeah.
Plus, your medic gear is heavier.
Yeah.
A medic is usually toting about 20 to 40 pounds more than regular infantry or soldiers are. And then, so I'm carrying all this extra stuff.
Oh my God.
And they're like, and I'm like, why? And the answer was just because I said so. It was like, okay, that hurt.
That's
Thank you, Captain. And then after that, I went to, when I deployed, I got pulled, probably because I had all 3 of those things, I got pulled into aviation as a flight medic, which was probably, if I had started in aviation, I might have actually stuck around longer. Yeah. Because that unit was the calmest, and nobody was, like, everybody was open to listening to suggestions no matter where you were on the spectrum of the totem pole, and they were very good about wanting to keep the people around. Like, they even offered me, like, so what kind of helicopter do you want to fly? Like, they were very coy about it. And I was like, well, I'd like to go back to college. And they're like, yeah, you'd need to do that if you want to do the officer thing, but we could also make you a warrant. And I was like, well, okay, but I'm a flight medic. Don't you need those? And they're like, Yeah.
Yeah, but
But
stay here, stay around.
yeah, right. They were just like, but we're comfortable with you.
Yeah, I'll say it like Aeromed School is probably my favorite training I ever went through. It was a lot of fun.
People don't realize. Well, and I didn't even get to. I had to do my Foxtrot stuff on the job.
Oh God.
I had to learn all of the aerobatic stuff on the job.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I didn't go to Campbell to do the courses or anything like that, and they didn't have a speed course for us for the thing. As a matter of fact, when I went to San Antonio for our pre-mob, they pulled me to Fort Bliss, and we did the rapid, like, 2-week refresher course, which I was already still up to date on all my medic stuff, so they could have actually probably sent me to that if they wanted to do that thing, but like I did that. Plus I had to learn, I was also doing all of the command stuff because I became the senior medic to the flight surgeon. So I had to assist him in all the other, so like I just was continuously working. I mean, when you deploy, we figured out the math, you have something like, you're getting like 7 cents an hour as an E5.
Yeah,
something
sounds
like
about right.
It's ridiculous. But yeah, the last thing that I did, forgot about this, we have a new book coming out called Moregrave's Miscellany that I'm doing with Keith Baker that we are putting together and for Eberron. And then I am also the Dungeon Master of the flagship show for Eberron called Inkwell Society, in which we have a neon noir approach so that people can see that there are other ways to play and that you can still involve pulp narratives into a noir, which is a slower, more grindy, almost more traditional look at how D&D was played.
That's so cool. Yeah. And so we are here to talk about running games for people who have served in the military.
Right.
And now one of the things that can happen, which is what you just saw, which is we start telling stories of all of our trainings and all the different things that we've done and can get pulled into that. But do you get to run many games for vets? Or?
So we actually had, when we started Maze Arcana, one of our side games that we worked into the kind of the canon of Eberron that we were doing things with was called Peanut Gallery. And that was me, Chris Lindsay, Satine, but then also Bill Benham and Travis Woodall, who are both Adventures League admins or were, and are veterans.
Awesome.
So we would goof around and have a good time with that. I also, pretty much any opportunity I get, run for vets. But also, before we started Maze Arcana, when I had just kind of started getting into GMing, and then when the conventions around LA where I was had so many more conventions, we had like a convention a quarter, I would run for a group called The Fleet. A bunch of Navy guys, some Army, and some Marine, and they were a handful if you weren't a DM that had that. So usually they would DM their own games, but they were just like usually one person shy of like a full AL table. So they would get just a random person slotted in with them, and they didn't know what they were doing. They were just like, or if they had to run for that group, and that group's like they've got their own stuff, they're doing lingo, like, all this thing. And it was a little overwhelming, but when I got slotted into that, we were like, I think we sat down to do the thing and they were just like, okay, so you're playing with us pretty much for all the rest of the times that we're doing things, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I guess so.
That's cool. When you're running a game for people who have been in the military, what are some considerations or things that you might expect to see, or like any special things to think about or keep in mind?
Well, I mean, and you're a psychologist, yes?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure, like, sometimes I get befuddled.
Everybody does. It's
right?
Okay.
They shouldn't have made those two so close.
No.
So sometimes, like, we have to appreciate that even if it's not military, we all have some form of PTSD. We're all, technically, it's baggage. We're all encumbered with our own baggage for things. And I try to be super aware, maybe because I've been through it, I try to be super aware of a specific type of PTSD that veterans are more prone to.
Yeah.
And so I always, at every table, and I learned this through playing with veterans and through running games for veterans and trying to be mindful of them, is that we always need to be doing our session zeros to see what people's triggers are.
Yeah.
To see, and trigger shouldn't be a bad word. It's better if we can come up with better clinically appropriate terms.
Yeah.
And as a medic, like, I fully appreciate all of this portion of it.
Yeah.
But we ought to be very thoughtful of what are the things that might cause somebody anxiety at the table. And further, what are the things that if we are not mindful of them at the table can cause somebody depression afterwards.
Right.
Right? Because depression is usually a lonely thing. It's usually a thing that happens when you are in a post-event.
Yes.
Or leading up to an event. But usually the anxiety is what takes over then. Leading up to, during, that's anxiety. Post is usually depression.
Yeah, talk about anxiety being a disorder of the future and depression is a disorder of the past.
There you go.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we have to be very thoughtful of, very mindful of, is that there are a lot of experiences that can happen in D&D or in active role-playing, and really anywhere where you need to trust other people, that can have you revisiting those things in your mind.
Yes.
And at the table is not a very good place to have an episode. Better if you can preface things and let people know that they're safe, because then they can start to work through some of those issues with you, yes?
Yes, most definitely. What are some safety tools that you maybe use? So like if something is getting trigger-aired, like bringing stuff up that wasn't expected.
Right. So we start, again, with our session 0. It's the most imperative thing. Communication is key. Commo is maybe one of the most important elements of the military specifically.
Yes. Yeah.
But even beyond that, and it's why we're so very specific with the way that we pronounce things when we go through radio training, when we go through doing our 9 lines, stuff like that you have to pronounce it in a very specific way, because on the other end of that, we may not be able to hear it. There may be a lot of stuff going on.
Might be garbled.
Right.
Yeah.
So think about that in the same way that you have your rose-colored glasses on, right? Or shit-stained glasses, like whatever. I don't know if we're allowed to do that.
You can cuss. It's okay.
Okay. I typically keep all of our streams super clean. So we don't want to... We want to make sure that we are receiving the information as it is being transmitted appropriately. And usually, 2 people don't speak the same. That's why we standardize things in the military.
Yeah.
So having a session 0 at the beginning of your game helps you to standardize the language that will be used during, and lets people know that if we're about to hit some sort of a sensitive area, that it is okay to voice that. And you should not feel as though, as long as you're not doing it for attention, right? Because that's selfish.
Yeah.
But as long as you are in a legitimately scary area for that, you should not feel unsafe by bringing that up. You should feel like it is absolutely what you ought to do.
Yeah.
And that everybody there is going to support you in that. So when we do session 0, I usually introduce myself. Even at convention tables, I introduce myself. I say, hey, this is how this is going. This is the kind of game. This is my expectation for the game. Is this okay with everyone? Does everyone have, if everyone wants to shift in a slightly different direction, I'll bend. It's not a big deal. It's not my game. I don't look at DMing as in it's like my story we have to tell.
Yeah.
To me, it's the table.
Yeah, everybody gives that input or feedback.
Right. So I start off with, does anybody have any red lines? Does anybody have any triggers that we need to be aware of? And I make sure that people know that they can open up and say things if they need to. Don't interrupt, don't be aggressive or super defensive about it, but just, raise your hand, let us know when we are treading too close, because we should your story or character or whatever is not more important than this person's well-being.
Right, right.
And vice versa, this is why it's like, don't be selfish about whatever it is that the thing is. Don't interrupt if it's not real. Like if you're trying to make a statement about something, this isn't the place.
No.
We're here to do a collaborative form of storytelling, and you have the opportunity to say the things you want to say, and we want to all be mindful and respectful of that. And being thoughtful of even when you're going to interject or when you're going to remind people of things that they might be threading close to, doing it in a respectful manner as well helps them to be respectful on the return. We don't want to set anybody on a defensive end. So X cards, red cards, even just sometimes this is in LARPing. This is how you say when you're out of character. It's one of the ways. Another way is like there's a couple of different ways that you can go about that. But doing something like this lets people know, if you establish in the beginning of the game, like, hey, we're getting a little close, and you can do that very quickly.
Yeah. If something does come up and it is triggering to someone, do you, and I assume it would be different like at a con game versus like a game with your friends, but do you process it afterwards or talk about it usually, or like? So
one of the things that, I don't know how much you dive into the idea of like BDSM and any of that other stuff, right? But there can be things that we can learn, especially from things that are supposed to drag us as close to our boundaries as possible. And I thought that was an interesting thing, so I read a few books on it. I did a little research into that. And one of the things that people use when they are because that's, especially if you were to watch anything like that, that is still a production. It's a performance. Right. BDSM is a performance. Yeah. And when you push somebody to that brink, you need to give them, like, you need to let them know they're still there, and they do that through a thing called aftercare. And I essentially say that after every game, there needs to be aftercare. People should not pick up and run off after every game. We have a lot of problem with that in live streaming because everybody's busy. Everybody wants to run off and move or to get home or like whatever. But you need to almost enforce the idea that everybody's going to sit around for 10 or 15 minutes afterwards and decompress.
Yeah.
Talk about any issues that came up during that, what they liked, what they didn't like. I use the AAR from the military. So we have sustains and improves, and we talk about danger. Danger areas, was everything safe? Do you see a thing like, oh, this is the story plot that's developing? Okay, I'm a little worried that maybe in the future, like I know we're not there yet, but maybe in the future it might go this direction. Is that, like, am I okay with that worry, or is this a thing? And by voicing that, we can all be mindful that we should steer away from that if that is something that might trigger something for somebody else.
You know, that's great. And I think one of the things too is, like, as a dungeon master, also getting consent from your players.
Oh, consent's imperative.
Oh yeah, but even for stuff like, sometimes, you know, you have a plot and you want your your player characters to come upon it naturally, but like to check in with the player and say, I think the story's going in this direction. Are you going to be okay with it, or is it going to make it not fun for you? Right,
generalize it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, if you're worried about like, oh, but then I'll give up the plot and like all that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm super worried about it all the time, especially because mine is a noir-based narrative. Thus, the layers of the question marks are important.
Yeah.
Every little clue is important. It leads to something. Every story point, every break like that. But I check in. I make sure that they're understanding that this is kind of like maybe where the narrative could head. These are options that are it. Do any of these options possibly cause you duress?
Yeah.
And then that usually makes that pretty easy. But if we've already had the discussion and I'm being mindful, and the rest of the group is being mindful of the things that could cause them anxiety or depression afterwards, that is something we almost don't run into.
Oh, that's great. Any resources that you would recommend for people who are going to be running games for former military members?
Mostly you. Yeah, mostly just following the things that you've been doing on that was a really good way for me to be consistently reminded of that. And that's, you and I talk on Twitter occasionally, going back and forth on some of those things, and we talk offline as well. But being able to have a group maybe that isn't in your game, or maybe a network of other dungeon masters, or even the stuff that you do at the VA or whatnot, just in general when you go, if you're a veteran, or if you're not, volunteering. Things that keep you close to it, that give you a good reminder, a good reality check towards what you're doing, are going to be good resources for you moving forward. And just stop and think take time by yourself to stop and think about not yourself, but about how things affect other people.
Yeah.
And how what you're doing, like when you're making your narrative, oh yeah, this is going to be so awesome, but like, okay, so then how will Megan react to this? Okay, I think I have a couple of ideas on how she might react to this. How will Satine? Okay. How will John? Okay. Great. I've gone through my list. I've double-checked on anything, and I should now continuously monitor my expectations. Because the key to making other people happy is to manage their expectations. The key to your own happiness is managing your own expectations.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of failure. Failure is what ultimately builds your personal character. So if you're looking at it in a game, it's the same. And don't be afraid to fail epically, because if failing creates character, then epic failure creates epic characters.
Definitely. It's definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
This is great, and I hope this was helpful to everybody. If you have questions, of course, leave them down below. We'll do our best to answer. And as always, let's make space at the table for everyone.
Please.